I'm so glad you're all here this morning to celebrate the opening of 2 exhibitions, and especially to hear the artist, Faye HeavyShield, speak about her extraordinary work this morning. A note of introduction: Faye is a groundbreaking and influential artist from the Kainai or Blood First Nation. Over her 4-decade career, she's established a practice that brings together a minimalist aesthetic with a feminist and Indigenous perspective that's rooted in her personal history. Her work has been exhibited widely in solo and group shows, and she has a retrospective that opened last year at the Mackenzie Art Gallery and will be traveling across a number of museums in Canada. As we gather to hear from Faye this morning, I wanted to take the opportunity to acknowledge that our work with Faye has truly deepened our team's understanding of the vitality of contemporary Indigenous art, to which Faye has contributed so much. At the same time, the project has really raised our awareness of local Indigenous histories, as well as contemporary contributions by Native peoples to the region. This territory was home to many Native tribes, which in recent centuries have included the Kainai Confederacy, the Osage Nation, and the Odo-Missouria, among others. We recognize the significance of this place to Native people's histories, beliefs, and livelihoods, as well as their continued connection to the land and water that they have stewarded for generations. As an organization, we have been learning the importance of building meaningful and lasting connections with Indigenous communities, as well as our role in amplifying Indigenous voices. To that end, it is a great pleasure to welcome Faye here this morning. Faye will be in conversation with our curator, Tamara Schenkenberg. And Faye, we are grateful and honored to have the opportunity to work with you. And we thank you for sharing your work and your words with us this morning.
Thank you. Just echoing Kara's thanks to you all for being here, and especially to Faye. It's always a thrill to talk to you, Faye, and I'm excited we get to do it yet again, this time in front of the audience. So I think we're gonna move chronologically in a way, and also just try to show and talk about as many works that are on view today, so we can learn a little bit more about Faye's practice, but also the works that she's created over her career. And to that end, I thought it would be helpful and nice to hear about your beginnings, if you could share about your early practice and also your way of finding your voice as an artist.
Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for your hospitality here. It's been, I'm glad I got to share it with my daughter Haley this time. So as far as beginnings, it was a dark and stormy night.
Way to set the scene.
Lightning crashes. No, I didn't grow up with this dream or fantasy of making art. And it wasn't until I was in maybe 30 years old, and I sort of fell into it because I didn't fit anywhere else. And but when I did end up studying art, I knew that was going to be my language, but I didn't know that right off the bat either. My first couple of years at the art college, of course, there's that requirement that for academics that you have to take art history courses. So when I would sit in on those art history courses and see, of course, all beautiful works, statues, paintings, but I never saw a reference to where I came from, or any, for that matter, not many other people of indigenous history. The works that I did see sometimes, they were referred to as primitive, and much of the time they were presented only when they had been presented or co-opted by someone else outside of that culture. So for that reason, I stopped going to art history classes. And I feel sometimes like a poser because sometimes my biography will say that I have a degree. I don't have a degree. I spent the 4 years there, but I did not meet the requirements as far as art history went. But I did, going into, I guess maybe the second year for sure, when I started to get a feel for where I was and what I wanted to do. It was out of necessity that I began referring to my own personal history as a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy in Southern Alberta, Canada, and as a member of the Kainai people. I grew up speaking Blackfoot, and I grew up on the plains in Southern Alberta, and so that was what started to be, I guess, my reference to art history and I guess formulating my own vocabulary when I would make art, because I would refer to stories I had heard, even the sound of the language, and I guess maybe using memory, using family, but I think most of all it was the environment that I grew up in. It was the physical, the land, the rivers, of course, the mountains to the southwest, and all of our history comes from stories that explain constellations, why Ninastiko is called Chief Mountain. All these land formations were rooted in, or they had a place in our stories.
You've talked about how your art comes from a place of distillation and really wanting to sort of compress your work down to its essentials, which sometimes has been described as minimalist, and sort of been put in conversation with the artists from the minimalist generation. I know, however, that as you've just touched on, you've traced sort of the spareness of forms in your work to that land of Southern Alberta. And we're seeing here some of the earliest works that are in the show. 3 sculptures, wall sculptures, Trap in Yellow Ochre 1, 2, and 3 from 1989. And it's clear here that you're interested in certain repetition. There's this hoop-like form and these tendril-like offshoots, and there's only a single color here, this sort of tawny yellowish ochre. So talk a little bit about the land. I have those images here if you want to start with that first and go to the sculpture and how it sort of plays into the work and the forms you use.
Well, there are many things that I guess go into, the decisions that I make when choosing to use that color. The color for sure I know is it comes from seeing what I would see every summer when I woke up. It was this bleached grass, it was the rolling hills, the coulees, the river even. And as far as you know, minimalism. Like I don't have a problem with that word, but for me, it it originates in the very fact that when you're out on the land or by a river, you don't need someone standing next to you and saying, "This is the river." You experience it, and so any sort of description is redundant. And so I think that was for me very important to get to that place where I don't need to be standing there and describing it. The materials and the concept of the piece will do that very strongly. So I guess that was one of the foundational lessons that I learned or that I chose to keep going with. That we don't need to have didactics or to say this is what even to say this is what this means, because when it's left open like that, it's welcoming the viewer to have to participate in that experience. And for trapping yellow ochre, it I've heard it described as a lot of different things, and one of them even being like related to the F word, feminism. uh, but those are labels, and those are labels that really, I think maybe that's not the intention, but it compartmentalizes something as elusive as art and concepts about the land. So it would be to me like putting up a fence around something.
Talking about fences. um, your early work addresses legacies of colonialism, and this piece in the foreground, Fort Belly, does that in different ways, as well as it opens it up to different kinds of interpretations, to your point of things not being singular or having a very predictable meaning. But can you talk to us about this piece? It's sort of a sloping hill with wooden stakes at its perimeter from 1992.
Well, in Canada as well as here, settlement meant forts, that structure of the fort. And there, where our community is, it's next to Fort Macleod, it's next to Fort Woopop, it's next to Fort Edmonton, Fort Calgary, and they were these, for one thing, permanent or an attempt at permanency. These structures where these walls are staked into the ground and they're meant to be for security. But who are you protecting yourself from? The people that inside the fort, who are you protecting yourself from us? And who are you keeping out? Who are you keeping in? So there was a time when I spent a lot of time trying to, I guess, take apart that idea of the fort. And also at the same time, I was beginning to use the body as reference. And so this piece, it's called Fort Belly for a reason, because it does address that idea of that attempt to stake a claim and pin something down. But also this is, to me, the shape of a pregnant belly. And so one of the things I know that I did here and in another couple of other pieces was that I wanted to humanize that idea of that structure and separate those poles that were, or those boards that were making up this wall that was so rigid. And when I am working with different materials, there's always something that's given to me from the material, from that idea. So when I started to thin, these wooden stakes, it brought to mind, bones, human bones or animal bones, and also another reference that came into play was in our culture. There's the Sundance, and each year the lodges that are put up, they're left, and so the everything that made it into that lodge for that Sundance is just, I guess, the ribs or the skeletal structure would be left for the next year. And so if you drive on the 509 from Standoff to Lethbridge, at the base of the Belly Butte, you'll see, several of these structures. And so that was kind of another nudge to me that not everything is about the fort, not everything is about exclusion. And so really a lot of development of this language that I would be using and continue to use. That's where it took place. And so it wasn't just one response to any one scene.
Also in the entrance gallery, we have this other early work, which is the earliest work in the show from 1987. And, you are a survivor of the residential school system. Most of us don't have that history or know about it, and it's only been recently in the public awareness because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I just wondered if you could speak to us either about residential schools, your experience, this work. I'll sort of leave it up to you to take it in the direction you would like to.
I think to maybe start out with that is that I don't identify as a survivor, because that means that it really has a really heavy connotation of victim. And, I did experience that being in residential school. But like any other experience, you ingest it, you process it, and it becomes part of who you are. And so I'm not, I can be messed up sometimes, but it's not always about residential school, But residential school, it was a full, I would say, about 10 years of my life, beginning when I was 6 years old. And I was so fortunate that I had a really strong, loving family that I went home to throughout those years in the summertime. And if there wasn't, really bad weather, by the time I came along, which I'm the third youngest of a large family, my parents made sure to come and bring us home on the weekends. But for those that went before me, that wasn't so. My mom attended, my dad attended, and for some of those individuals, they didn't have that. They didn't have that love, or they didn't have that opportunity to be reminded each time, okay, you're not a residential school kid. You have a family, you have parents, you have grandparents, you have your language. But there was a huge rupture in our culture when that took place, just because of the limits, the restrictions, really harshness that took place in the name of religion. And in Canada, the residential schools were they were supported by both the government and the church and the state. And I know someone had asked me the other day, like, what would happen if, as if we had a choice, and I used to wonder that too, like, how come my mom didn't just say no, but it was the law. And if she or if my parents didn't send every one of us, they were going to end up in jail. They would be fined. And in Blackfoot, there is a name that they used to give to that. And in Blackfoot, they called it the red letter. So you would get this post, and if they knew that your child wasn't attending, then so I mean that's really the legacy of the residential school, is that for those who maybe weren't as fortunate as I was, they they continued to live the effect of that to this day. And I worked with children's services in our community for about 15 years. I just recently retired, and I worked not as a social worker, I guess a cultural worker. And so the children and youth from our community who were placed in non-Indigenous homes, away from the community, away from their family, that was our target. So we would put together gatherings where we would bring people in from the community, professionals, elders, and then they would make connections for these children in care. But even with those efforts, there are, I think at one point in our part of Alberta, Southern Alberta, of all the children that were in care, 80% were from Indigenous. They were from our community, or they were from our neighbors, the Piikani. And I really haven't heard that there's been a decrease in those numbers. It fluctuates a bit, but it's. I heard a talk one time by this man. I think his name is Terry Cross. He did a talk, and he listed 5 things that needed to be in place to colonize a people. And one of them was you take away their land, you take away their language. By the time he got to number 5, he said, when any of those failed, you take away their children, and then that's what does it. And so I mean that's still it's still so evident in a lot of communities, the effect of residential school.
You've talked about your work with children's services and the importance of what being an artist taught you about having a choice. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about what it taught you and how you tried to transfer that to the students, to the youth that you encountered.
Well, I think that was in place already, like I said, with a very warm, loving home. I think by the time I started making art, that's when it really came through in my mind the importance of decision making. And even if for a child who's not, in that situation, I really believe that it starts early to start to foster that decision making in a child. And so, what if somebody wants to say, if they're told, okay, well, it's 8:30, you have to go to bed, and if they start to fuss and they say, well, no, I want to stay up till 9, what's the big deal? You tell them, okay, that's your choice, but you're going to be grumpy in the morning. And, you let them know the consequence, and not because, you're going to bed because I say so. But it really means a lot when any person can make those decisions, and the more you make them, and that's for me where art became, I got to be the boss of everything, like I got to choose. That's important for me. I just asked my daughter. Although she's just as bossy. No, but that decision making, it's freeing, and of course you learn consequences all along the way. And going into art making, like you're going to know, okay, well, oil sticks aren't the way to move this around, or it's going to be graphite that you need, or just those materials. You learn from those materials as you're making those decisions, and it's a great place to be.
Well, talking about materials, over time, you have developed a practice that sort of uses photography, but in a very unconventional way. You're more working with photographic imagery. And you also have established now over a decade a body of work that relates to rivers. So maybe talk to us about the importance of rivers to you personally as an artist, and then a little bit more about this work, Nita Tan, that is premiering here at the Pulitzer.
Well, it is about rivers, and I have been making work with rivers. I think I wanted to just voice how important those, that river systems, waterways, all those things that are part of our environment, how important they are to our survival. And not just survival, but, just that lushness of life that you get from it, and that needs to stay in place. But when I started working with rivers, it was never. I did use a camera, kind of a fancy camera at one point, but as you know, I've considered myself not just low tech, no tech, and so I now, for the most part, use my phone. But I know one of the first projects that I did was with the river, and then of course the Old Man River for us is the Old Man. It's our grandfather. But when I started knowing that I was going to use images of the Old Man, I walked down the hill from Haley's home, and I started taking pictures right up close with the river. But then I had to cross the bridge, to continue. And I thought, oh, it's really going to be nice shots. I'll cross the bridge, and then I'll lean over and I'll start taking pictures. But then I started to get dizzy. And so I had to sit down. There was a little bench. I had to sit down, and I held my little camera, and I just kept taking pictures. But then that really also, it spoke to me also, this aspect of how the river could be the same but different each moment that you're by the river, just because of the flow, because of the light at that time of day. And so even with me sitting and not even seeing what I was taking pictures of, all those were so different. And so it's continued to be one of the, I guess, well, I guess what the river tells us, that it still has so much life in it, and we do need to preserve that. For this piece, I had already had quite a library of images of rivers from the Ottawa River in Winnipeg, those really strong rivers, the Red River, Assiniboine, in Fredericton, and so all those put together. I didn't want it to call it Ayu Nitdanis, which is the plural. It was important for me to keep it as almost like a deity. So Ayu Nitdan, it's you're calling for a blessing from river.
Not rivers.
Yeah.
But river as an entity, as a single
Yeah.
connected one.
And so it was I think I had an inkling that I did want to. I knew I would be in the vicinity of these, really mighty rivers here. Um, so instead of trying to invent something new, what's also too that I mentioned before that it's important for me to respect what we're taught as Nichitapi is to be gracious and to know our place as guests. And so I'm not going to try and bring something here. That's my idea already of the rivers here at the confluence, but the rivers have to have a voice in it.
And I think when we first started talking about a project here, there was no predetermined
No.
direction that there was going to be two site specific pieces. But knowing how important place and land is in your work, maybe we could have predicted that you would connect to sites here. And I think that's the reason why those sites visit happens and why you met so many members of the community, which sort of led to the visit to the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers that are part of this work, and also a visit to Cahokia. And this work, Honor Cahokia, came out of that. And for those out of town visitors who might not be familiar, Cahokia is a site that was built by the Mississippian peoples who had a thriving and a sophisticated civilization here. Cahokia is one of many sites, and while it's a historic place, it has a continued contemporary resonance to the descendants of the Mississippian people. And you had a very special experience there and wanted to create this work. So talk to us a little bit about that experience and this work in particular, which is sculpture and then a drawing on a wall as well.
Well, in the process of making artwork, you'll find that there are so many things that will be brought to your mind to add, so that it's not a singular or a predetermined portrait of something. So one of the things, of course, was the visit to Cahokia, and it's a very sacred place, and it's a place where I could sense that it triggered my imagination, so that I wasn't thinking of it as a place where, oh, it's from the past and now it's an interpretive center and it's a tourist kind of thing. It was I think spending time there, you can really sense the life of the place, the spirit of the place that endures. And for me, one of the things that took place was I began to imagine the life that had taken place there. And I could imagine kids laughing, playing, people going about their everyday routines, which is, instead of framing it in a sense that, okay, they're not here anymore. But if you open yourself up to it, you can start to, I guess that's the true sense of relating to the place. And it's telling you that, yeah, you are related to us. So it was a really profound experience for me. Other things that started to take place as this work took shape was my first visit here last year. One of the things I noticed was all the brick buildings. I really found that beautiful. There was another connection where, I knew it had to be this color red ochre, because to me that's a part of the land. And so it just so happened that these bricks come from the land. And I've used that color before in my work, and it's at times signified different things like blood, uh, life. So that was, I think the title of the show Confluences, I mean, it speaks to more than a single work of art. There's so many things that are feeding each other. And even the other day when we were setting up the work, one of the people here from the Pulitzer, we had finished talking about the river, and then when we moved here, he told me that the mortar that held the bricks together was from a very specific place along the river. It had to be from there. And so there's that vein now that joins these two things. And, geographically, yes, but also this, I've really got a lot of things from different people that, of course, the people that helped install. And, as this took shape, it was learning so many things. So it doesn't stop when it's installed, like that's what's alive about it, is that someone who experiences it and shares that experience with you. It really just adds to my understanding of the piece, and I'm really grateful for that.
Maybe we'll go to the final gallery next and first talk about this work, which is a series of drawings with a repeated silhouette. And it's called I'll Know You When I See You. So who's the you in the title, and what can you tell us about this work?
Well, this started out, I guess, just these little quick marks of drawing. I don't maybe even know that they can be called drawings. They're these silhouettes. And it started even before I knew what I would be tracing it to was a picture of my mother when she was a child. And she's standing in a row with some other children, some other girls, and they're all dressed up. And that, she would have been in residential school. And there aren't many pictures of my mom from that age. And so when I recall looking at that picture, and it seemed that she wasn't really looking into the camera. It just seemed like I really sensed a distance, and I don't know if I was imposing that on her just because of the relationship we ended up having, as a mother-child, affected by the residential school and the separations that were taking place there. So I would draw this over and over again, and sometimes it would be a single silhouette, other times it would be a small grouping. And then the more I did it, even when I kind of thought to myself, okay, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to find my mom. But after a while, it just went beyond that. It was no longer about it. It was about just making those marks, and maybe that was writing a letter to her and not even talking about emptiness or searching. It was that I'm here because of her, and those marks are giving me a certain place of thought or even pleasure. And so it's just grown beyond that. And it was a philosophy of my mom's, that perseverance. And she had a tough life, but she always told us it's not an option to give up. You just keep going. And so in a sense, that's what I had been doing with these drawings, was I just kept drawing. So I think that's, because maybe I did find her. Maybe that's what I heard from her. But it is about, just making these drawings, and each time you sit, it's almost like the river. Each time you sit and do a drawing, it's going to be different from the one before. So you're given that freedom also of choice.
It's really beautiful. Also, you made these marks on very commonplace materials, notebook paper, index paper. Talk about that sort of ordinariness of material in your work.
I think that decision to go that way came early on when I was attending the art college. And I know my friends from Calgary will probably remember Frank Vervoort at the art college, and a really wonderful, wonderful, generous, learned man. He was a painter. And in foundation year, he taught a couple of drawing, and I think there was another class that he was ways of seeing. I think that's what it was called. It was really a great place to be. You got to be in a place where it's I don't know, some people might call it airy fairy, or but it was a good place where you relaxed. And he would do things like he would put music on and he'd make us lay on this concrete floor and just listen with the lights turned off. And another one was one exercise I remember is that he would call them sustained drawings. So for a class that lasted for 3 hours, you would work on a drawing on a still life or something. And many of the students that were, attending at the same time I was, were younger than me, probably just fresh out of high school, and very earnest and very skilled, most of them. And so you work on these drawings, and then for this one exercise, at the end of the 3 hours, you have this kind of sigh of, looks pretty good, because of the time I put into it. But then he said, okay, now take the drawing and tear it up. And so that was a real lesson in, the preciousness that, you can impose on something that you're making without it really being precious. So I just that, and just because of I wasn't didn't have a lot of money to spend on canvases or oils or all that stuff, and so I guess I really just felt comfortable in using very ordinary materials, and it also speaks to you know my belief that art can be ordinary, just in the sense that you wake up and you're not going to say, I'm going to make some art today. Like you don't know if you're just going to sit and say, well, I'm going to do some beading, or I think I'll take a walk, take some pictures, and also that it can be anything that you're doing. It could be beadworking, it could be singing, it could be writing, ordinary things. And I think that's the beauty of art, that it can be ordinary.
Maybe just one last work. At the end, this is the red line. It's only been shown once before, and in this configuration, and it assumes a very different form. In a gallery behind us, it's a beaded work, and you've described your art as a living entity, and I thought maybe we could just finish with some thoughts about that idea and the concept you have.
And I think even the idea of working with multiples and repetition,
Yep.
That's in sync with using those ordinary materials, because like for the river piece, it's been, it's not one solid portrait of a river. It's been dematerialized, and then then you put it back together depending on, all these other things that come into play. So the same with the red line, each unit is one bead woven around a red cord. And it's, when this started, it was right when COVID was isolating a lot of people, a lot of families. And really that's what kept me company was, there was just a few of us that were seeing each other in our cohort. But the beading, it was visiting with not just memories, but thinking ahead or acknowledging certain things. And so it is about lineage for sure, but it's also about, I guess, maybe storytelling. Because the initial length of this was sent here, but it was important for me to continue working on it and add to it. And I kept it with me for those few days before it was installed and before it was joined, because I really wanted to include the kindness that I felt here from all the people here. So thinking of Kristen and Moira and everybody here, Shane. To me, I was thinking, well, as I think of them, they become part of it, just as they became part of the installation of the river.
Thank you. I think we can take a few questions in closing. If anybody has anything for Faye. Yes, please.
I really love this talk, and one of the things that strike me that I have to ask is about the idea of picture taking, and I wonder if this idea ever entered into your consciousness about the idea of a photograph kind of can capture a spirit. And when I look at the river wall that you constructed, that idea really came to me. I just thought I'd bring that up, and whether you kind of agreed or had that thought about how a photograph can, even when you're taking a picture of a person, you maybe stealing or capturing a spirit for a moment, and so that idea kind of has resonance with me, and I just thought I'd share it with you.
I think that, I know that was maybe an impression that certain, maybe some people, especially in the past, they would have that thought of, especially when photographers first started encountering Indigenous people, that maybe they would feel, or they would have that belief that, well, this is something new, especially when they saw themselves frozen on that piece of paper. Okay, well, maybe that's part of my spirit that's being captured. For me, it's more about the immediacy of taking pictures or taking that image. I think maybe I would call it borrowing, just because I don't call myself a photographer. I don't know anything about lenses. Even when you have a nice camera, it's always set on automatic. So what's the use of spending those extra dollars on a fancy camera? I think you did bring up a good point with, something I forgot to mention was it was important for me to to let the designers that were helping with this know that there had to be a metallic of an aluminum frame surrounding this, and that was talking about how industry has imposed itself on these river systems. But all these little images, they're more about maybe glimpses of, the river and all that it can be and all that it is. And also the movement, the placement of that. It's not a portrait, or it's not just not still,
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions? Yes.
I have a question. You talk about your experience in the art college, the art school, but then you're kind of like disagreeing with like that Eurocentric art history in that part. But then I wonder, in your later artist career, is there any any other reference you looking at in your practices?
Could you repeat?
Yeah, so if you can maybe mention any references to other art making or artists who were important to you, or practices that were important to you that may have informed your practice.
Oh yeah, for sure. There were people whose art I very much admired and admire to this day. One of them being Louise Bourgeois and Anish Kapoor. There are a lot of artists whose work I saw, but it was really that visual impact that I got, but learning a bit more about Louise Bourgeois' work and her conversations with the material, with relationships within the family, like with mother, and as you're attracted to it, you want to learn more. But initially, it was the first part of being attracted or feeling a kinship with it was for sure, the work that they made.
Maybe we have time for one more question if there's anybody else. Liz?
The piece that's up on the wall, the river piece, looks so extraordinary in this gallery. And I wonder if you can talk a bit about your relationship to this space and place as you were conceiving and then finishing and being involved in installation. Next to blue black and the water, it's astonishing.
Well, for sure, it began as site specific, and the architecture is so impressive here that it had to be a part of it. It couldn't just be something that was made to fit. It had to be. Again, along the way, it was so many other things that were making themselves part of the conversation, like this window along here with the pond, with the pool of water, and that there were so many different angles that it could be experienced, like up on mezzanine, or so it's the length of it, but it really did. It was a challenge, but also each time you were presented with a challenge, there was an answer that said, this is the way it's got to be, like the length of it. Well, that really lent itself to the idea of presenting the river as this flowing piece. So for sure, the architecture in the space, it had to be. It couldn't have been born in any other space in this gallery.
Thank you, Faye, so much. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.